So we'll go ahead and start.
Yeah, and tonight we're talking about the Rasayana, which means the path of good taste or flavor. Not necessarily good taste. Sometimes
sometimes it's bad taste.
Bad taste, but it's the path of juice or rasa.
And so this topic came up when we were recently teaching the pranayama course in reference to pranayama practice and in reference to yoga. And, it's a topic that is near and dear to me as someone who, for a big period in my life, was a professional chef. And rasa, or the flavor, or the unspeakable concoctions that turn into what we interpret as flavor, has this dual play where it is part of what we relate to both as yoga people, but as everyday people eating our dinner. And when you start looking at what rasa means from the Indian perspective, it's kind of interesting. And it ties into some of the content that we've talked about in other talks in terms of emotion and activity and action in the world that is driven by our emotional underpinning.
Mm-hmm. So yeah, rasa means one thing. It means taste, literally. But it also then means relationship and different flavors in relationship with others, everything from really good to really bad to really miserable to exceptionally funny. And so we should.
Yeah, and part of when the term started being used was with the wonderful, what was he, a scholar?
Abhinavagupta.
Abhinavagupta, who he is the person in Indian literature and
Kashmir Shaivism.
Yeah, who really coined the terms
developed it, Philip,
associated with aesthetics.
Yeah, and it was in existence before him in terms of like the arts of say Indian dance or theater. Everyone was studying, like the different emotions and from very early times. And he really brought it into the tantric realm, or the realm of deep enlightened experience.
And so emotion or rasa, and we'll talk about the 9 rasas that have been, sort of the part of this practice that we're looking at. But the emotions are really the ground upon which so much is built. And yet it is part of each one of us, the emotions are. And as Abhinavagupta would say, he started talking about them really in terms of that they were expressions of the unexpressible, of the aspects of experience that we really can't put words on, which is why they then become so relevant when we start thinking of aesthetic. And for me recently in my work with various different jobs that I have, where I'm working with people on burnout and self-care and learning to cope with being in the world in the state that it's in. One of the things that has struck me profoundly is the lack of attention to the importance of the aesthetic, in kind of dealing with things like our ability to tap into the truth of our being, tap into the truth of who we are, so that we can deal with difficult situations.
Because we become so philosophical about it. We have a belief, and then we ignore our emotions, which I think most of us have emotions all the time.
You do.
Yeah,
Oh,
I even had one the other day.
that's good. That's good.
And but all types, even right now, you're having emotions, and this is part of the embodiment that yoga starts to peel apart and reveal, and it's very, very deep. And so when we really get into practice, we start seeing, wow, as I start to really pay attention to what's I'm feeling in the body, then I start to see, ooh, there's some strong things going on, good and bad, but it's always some kind of emotional play is happening.
Mhm.
And, so should I do a little?
Sure.
There's a little chant that's good to start with, and I'll translate it after I do it. Om Mukham Karoti Vachalam Pangum Langayate Girim Yat Kripatam Maham Bande Paramananda Madhavam. So that is saying to the supreme joy, Madhava, which is the name of Krishna, by whose grace the dumb can speak eloquently and the lame can cross mountains. And that's considered the auspicious way to approach any impossible task, like trying to explain what all of this is. Yeah, like trying to explain process. And let's see. So there, well, there are 9 basic rasas, and then historically later on they got expanded as things went on. And I can just, the first is called Shringara, and if you can say, oh, Shringara Rasa, and it basically means love, in the sense of like falling in love romantically, and of course then the meaning of it can go all the way just to sexual attraction, but to the point of really being like, oh, there's someone, that if I'm with them, I just feel this incredible joy and happiness. And so it's considered to be the big potential rasa that opens up into the deepest enlightenment. And of course, then with that particular love rasa, you also have immediately most of the traditions will look at, well, you have when you're actually together with your beloved, and sometimes you're together with them even though you're at a distance, and sometimes you're with them and you're not together with them, but there's that sense of you're like, and then there's the sense of like, oh, they're gone or they're separated, and this is an inevitable wave, because everything is always in wave patterns, and so that's an inevitable wave, and both those conditions are considered very wonderful, and the deepest one is when there's separation, and then you have to look very, very deeply, and you find the joy of what's really going on, and you find them in your heart, and you find all beings in the heart. Okay. Because then once they're in your heart, they can't get away. And then another rasa, which we often will fall into, and it's within yoga and within just relationship, it's a very good thing. It's called hasya, which means joy, but it also means humor. And so because that's when you start to see that this is kind of, you intuit, you feel emotionally that this is kind of silly, and that there's this intuition that these things are part of these great vibratory patterns that everybody's going to, and so you start to see, oh, that all of my thoughts about it are paradoxical in an ultimate sense. You know, I have this theory about it, then I have that theory about it, and I've missed, and you go, haha, and you actually gain a sense of humor.
Yeah, and it's the kind of sense of humor that is not sort of sarcasm and degrading and sort of a bitter kind of sense of humor, but a sense of humor that's really based in this feeling of love and of connectedness.
Yeah, because the humor, like bad jokes in which you're laughing at the demise of another person, that rasa will then degenerate into what you're really feeling, which is some kind of probably fear or who knows what, but it's kind of scary. And then the next one is called abhuta, which means a sense of wonder. And this is related in yoga, of course, to the sense of nirodha, when you just go, ah, and very closely related to humor, in which you kind of are laughing at paradox, but you're still like playing the game. But in a sense of wonder, the central channel, you've actually intuited on a very deep level the interdependence of all of these things, and so the mind is stunned.
Yeah, and this sense of wonder we practice in a way every day when we do our asana practice through the quality of drishti, where we sort of soften the gaze and have this feeling of non-attachment to what we are looking at and non-attachment as a separate entity from what we are looking at. And when we have just glimpses of that day in and day out, or within a posture or within a movement, a breath, then there are these just sort of these moments of wonder. And what's curious and interesting to experience is to feel that through the eyes in the rest of the body and feel it kind of weaving its way into the core.
And oftentimes you'll do kumbhaka, your breath will stop, and you're not sure whether you were breathing in or breathing out when it stopped, but the middle path is opening, and that's wonderful. And then Shanti Rasa, this is of course peace, Om Shanti, Shanti, Shanti. And Shanti Rasa is very good before bedtime, or if you sleep well, it's good. But remember that Shanti, the word Sham, doesn't mean just peace in the ordinary sense. It means a radiance, like our friends at Shambhala, that's a divine land, which is just pure radiance. So it's peace that is utter satisfaction. And in many schools, they'll consider, the Shanti Rasa is the highest rasa. And they're saying, you got to watch out for the Sringara and all of those others. But Shanti, that's where we're going. But many schools, many of the tantric schools will say, no, if you don't get attached, be careful. And so then Rodra. Rodra is, might remind you of the name of Shiva, Rudra. So Rodra means anger. And anger, of course, is the result of, next time you get angry, and if you're able to then watch it very closely, anger will then start to reveal why you're angry, and what kind of mistake is being made, and not necessarily just in you, but others can make you angry. And oftentimes from a contextual point of view, for a legitimate reason. A lot of times, though, our anger is merely directed out because we're just angry at everything. And so anger is, of course, then considered one of the most powerful of the rasas. And if you can experience anger without an object, and this is a very big practice in, I know in the Vajrayana, and then in where you can feel extreme anger, but you're totally aware that there's nobody angry at nothing. It's just the physical, and and it manifests, and there are actually yoga poses that can help you experience anger with no object. And that's considered so vibrant that it's one of the keys, or one of the secret gateways into the deeper parts of yoga. And anger is something that culturally, or just in terms of our own ego, we don't like to experience, particularly in yoga practice. I'm being good. I said my mantras. I bowed to whomever I bow to, and yet anger arose, and it's embarrassing. And then you become, of course, this is my favorite thing, is you become angry at your anger, and then you keep going in these endless chains of suffering. And this is considered within the Rasayana to be a very important flavor, not one you want to live in all the time.
But also not one of the things we've talked about with all emotional states in other talks too, is that it's not like, you have these emotions like anger that arise, that, it's like you're playing whack-a-mole, where you want to then hit that down, and when it pops back up, you hit it down over there. No, that it's the part of the contextualization of these states, which are actually embodied states. And we'll talk about how they are talked of, in terms of the koshas, et cetera, in a moment, but they are, they're really parts of each one of us, and parts of cultures, and parts of all experience, that actually are natural parts of these manifestation of life. And yet we become, as Richard's saying, we become either attached to something like the feeling of love, or the feeling of humor, or, repulsed,
Shanti, peace,
or repulsed by ourselves and this feeling of anger. And then, then it becomes this game of whack-a-mole, where you don't want to do this, you hold it down. And that's not what the teachings are. Although there are traditions that we'll go into in a bit that are interesting in terms of trying to change rasas, or trying to transform them mentally, or.
Yeah. I'll go on to the next one. Then there's interesting. The next one is vira, or virya, which is heroism. It's being brave, and of course, some of us, we have in yoga. You can, if you just strike the good posture, then you are, in a sense, creating or imitating courage. And courage is the ability to not know something. So remember Shraddha and Virya in the Yoga Sutra, that Shraddha is simply the ability not to know something. And then Virya is courage. And so this is when you are able to have enough intuitive trust that you can stand up and have your heart open, even in the face of, terrible circumstances. And it's considered the precursor to smriti, or mindfulness, which is when you're just going back and, again, paying closer attention to what you are trying to focus on, without getting distracted by, the labels you make for it. And then, and another one is Karuna Rasa. And so Karuna, as we know, means compassion, and is, the metta practices. When you meet someone who is joyous, just another being, and this is actually hard to do for most people. If you meet someone who's really joyous, to practice Maitri, which is friendliness. In other words, you're really joyous that they're joyous and not envious that they're joyous, which is a big one. And then you meet someone who's dukkha or suffering, then you practice compassion. And so compassion is within ordinary religious society in India. Karuna is also means sadness. I think of empathetic fatigue and all of this, where someone is sad, and or it doesn't have to be another person, it could be any living creature is sad and you're sad, and this is just a natural empathy or resonance with others, and very powerful. And then bhaya is fear, and so fear is something that's a deeper rooted cause. When we start to just looking under all of these other distractions, we get down to the fact that we're basically frightened, and we're frightened of perhaps impermanence. We're frightened of reality. We're not even sure what it is we're frightened of, but fear is very deep. And if you're able to embody or feel that in a mindful way, it's going to open up a very special gate. And then another one is called vibhatsa, which is called disgust. And that's when you just want to spit something out. And it's often with oneself, but occasionally it's with a politician. And it is like a transmutation of anger into a kind of rejection, where it's just, yeah. And in terms of rasa as meaning flavor, there are also these basic flavors that are like, yeah. But a lot of them are very medicinal in very small quantities, as we know. So then, we could go into the Panchakusha. Okay, so many traditions relate these to the Panchakusha, which means the 5 sheaths, and many traditions relate them to other levels of manifestation, but all embodiment. And so there are 5 sheaths that currently you're wearing, which including that you often are identifying with out of just confusing, avidya, not knowing what's going on. And so the first of these koshas that you identify with is called Anamaya Kosha. And ana means food. And this is a very special one. In the early Vedic teachings and early Upanishads, food is just glorified because obviously it's something that then most creatures value quite a bit. And it's describing that the body is actually food. And obviously, if you've ever lived in out in the forest or the woods or the jungle, your body could very easily be food. And it probably will become food at a certain point, unless it's cremated, at which point it'll still be good compost for the earth. And so it's the level of the body in which everything interrelates effortlessly. It's almost like nature. And so the Anamaya Kosha is the what the entire body is. And so that would include muscles, ligaments, bones, and if I might say, connective tissues like fascia. And so it is incredibly responsive to the other layers or the other layers of the different koshas or the different sheaths. And this is very important. And this is something that the early traditions recognize. But of course, later when we become more dualistic and we look at the body as just a miserable, impermanent vehicle, better to get rid of it. And we stop appreciating the body itself.
Yeah, and this kosha, this body kosha, really, when in the early perception of it, what was so beautiful about it was the fact that it was not only this integration within all these layers that we are aware of within our own body, but also that those layers extended out, interconnecting us with space, with the rest of everything else, so that the boundary between who we are and what the rest of the world is less identified when you look at, that pure kosha, as we are just completely interconnected within our own form, but also as we are part of the bigger whole.
Mhm.
And that is key to understanding how these rasas are so important, and not things to be squelched, but things to be examined and lived with in their fullest without becoming stuck in any one aspect of them. And so when we become, as you're saying, when we take the dualistic view of my body versus the world, that's when things start going off the rails.
Yeah.
And in this study of the rasas and the koshas, it's right at the very beginning of that, because the element of love is essentially that same taste of interconnectedness.
Yeah. So when the kind of esoteric teaching started in the early Upanishad, the mantra that you were to chant, and it's an easy one: aham anam, I am food, I am food, I am food. And it's a different way of like sharing yourself with others. And the fact and the imagination of some of these early poets is very vivid, and they would literally imagine that, or imagine deities or themselves as all these different plants and edible things, and it was good insight.
Yeah.
Something that a lot of us are afraid to think about. And so then the next kosha is called Pranamaya, or prana is the kosha. And so what prana is sensation itself. And we'll have to be careful defining that, because you're experiencing it. It's what's, they call it a pratyaksha. It's right before your eyes, it's in your face, it's in your skin, it's in your ears, all of the senses. And the immediate sense pattern is this vibrance. And that vibrance is considered, within the Sankhya system, within early yoga systems, within the Buddhists, to be the spanda. It is vibrant Shakti. And if you can experience it without being distracted, if you can keep going back mindfully, then it's like, and it'll cause that state of wonder for sure. And it is really the direct experience of the sensations. That pattern in the Monomaya Kosha, and also that are patterned then by the other koshas, which I would say, and some people call them higher koshas. I think that's a mistake. The next is called the Monomaya Kosha, and manas just means mind in the simple sense of labeling something. Your mind labels it, it gives it a name, and for survival, this is extremely important. Like if you see a mosquito, there's a mosquito, or if you see what would you, police, they're the police. So it's very important to be able to label things, and then and often built into the Monomaya Kosha is, of course, the survival reaction to that. So if it's in certain contexts, that's going to keep you alive. Other contexts, it won't. But it's the lowest level of mind, Monomaya, and it's merely the initial labeling. But then, more subtle than that, or higher than that, or deeper than that, is called the Vijnanamaya. Vijnana is a sense for specific wisdom, specific insight, and this involves two principles. One is called ahamkara, which is the maker of I, or that's the tendency that we all have, and it's just part of manifestation, is to become ego-centered. So ego is a very functional thing, not necessarily a bad thing, because it's the creative principle. I have like, the ability to be a separate organism, therefore to create or to have a unique interactive role with everything else in manifestation. So ahamkara is actually considered a divine thing. And of course, it's dangerous only if you identify with it. Okay. And so, of course, a very famous thing is, I am not my ego. And you say it with
I've heard you
humility.
say that before.
Yeah. And so it's considered a creative principle. And because otherwise, every all kinds of beings have ego, it doesn't have to be just humans, but, and then the next one is called the buddhi, which of course means the intelligence. And this, of course, is related to the word Buddha, which means to awaken. Buddha is to wake up. And buddhi is the level of intelligence that understands context. And so it's able to separate name and form. Those got stuck together in the manas level. And then the buddhi sees, that which is actually something, is not really the name that's given to it, or the code that's given to it. And of course, then that buddhi also then applies, that intelligence applies to when you see code itself, or symbols themselves, language itself, which is a whole realm, and it's divine too, but you don't get stuck in that. You're able to see through it, that there's essentially no form in anything we're looking at. There's none of it is actually self, or none of it is actually, in the Sankhya system, the Purusha, or none of it is the true you or pure consciousness.
And then it's insight. It's really the birthplace of insight.
Yeah. And so that's where a Buddha is someone who is awakened and has that brilliance of the intelligence. And that's considered the real tool that's going to cause happiness, or it's going to allow the Sringara Rasa, or the any of those rasas, to reveal what it actually is, which is this unspeakable, amazing experience, which we're all having. So,
and then at the core is this sense of bliss and spaciousness, and the real sense of truly the mystical experience that is always there, if only we take time and take the path to get there.
And so this innermost sheath is called Anandamaya, or made of joy. And of course, this that always comes with warnings. Don't mistake. You have a picture of what joy looks like a big smile, going and dancing. It's just like when you take a selfie when you're out hiking in nature, and it's never quite the same. And so you have this joyous experience, but with the narcissistic tendency that our phones have embedded in us, you take a picture of what that joy looks like, and then of course that experience never returns in exactly the same form, and so joy never comes back. And that's so, but the Anandamaya Kosha is that kosha in which manifestation of all of these rasas and forms is revealed. And so is joy, and it's considered inseparable then in that from what's really going on, which of course is very difficult to describe.
And so many people Are we back?
You're back.
Oh, we're back.
You froze for a couple minutes.
How
Yeah.
long did we freeze?
We froze for eternity at this
No.
end. From your end.
Eternity
it was
or
probably-
30 seconds.
Oh, okay.
Not long.
Yeah.
You're back.
It was
Thank you,
hours.
Chrissy. Yeah, so it's within the prana body or the prana kosha where there's this liaison effect going on between mind and body. And so we have this capacity, and this is why we kind of came around to this when we were working with the pranayama workshop the last couple of weeks. You know, this idea that like with body work that one might get to sort of open up different parts of our body that we, in this modern age, we've become, that's part of what many of us do is we go and we get some body work. And the same sort of body work can be done through our own manipulation and awareness of the prana and of the body as it relates to the prana, and of the mind and the emotions as they relate to the prana. So it's quite fascinating to look at it from that angle. And one of the other things that we were talking about earlier today that just I was blown away by, and this, I'd love you to talk about this a little more, but it is this notion that when we look at the rasas, and we look at some of the things that are traditional now in Indian culture or in different cultures that examine the rasas, there are things like Navaratri, which is the 9 days of celebration
of the different flavors,
rasas, of the different flavors.
It's very cool.
Or there's the rasa sadhana, where you view, you sort of try to cultivate the opposite feeling, like you take a fast, let's say. That's one of the ways some of the people talk about it. You do this practice where you do not allow anger to enter into your experience, which can be very angry making if you try that, or you don't, so you take a fast from some of the rasas so that you start, one would think that in the beginning that might be an interesting thing to do. It's sort of like the fast when you eat, and then really seeing the intricacies of the different foods. And if you take a break from being the same sort of courageous or disgusted person that you tend to be all the time, that you then see some of the more subtle aspects of yourself, and in that, but the aspect that I thought was fascinating was thinking about how emotions really are this part of all of our lives that actually, for many of us, and for many cultures, are more feminine in expression,
That's interesting.
other than sometimes anger. But the emotions are a very feminine part of what is expressed. And you brought up the idea of why sometimes there might have been sort of attention given to the rasas in a patriarchal society.
Right. Well, one thing is that a lot of times the expressions of the rasas were done through deities expressing them. And so, and often these were, and this is, of course, you can imagine the stories of Radha and Krishna, or Parvati and Shiva. And so, and then there are various phases of story where the different goddesses would express, these extreme angers, and the deity forms, of course, for the person who could really resonate with them, would give them they were a great medicine, just like mantra also. Mantra is like music, and if I could have the holy name of something and just sing it and sing it and sing it, like it can really help me to have insight. But then culturally, what happens is we idolize, or we try to solidify that, and it becomes something that then the ruling class, or those who have it done, the billionaires, the autocrats, or those in power, they use it then to reinforce their position. And so oftentimes the Sringara Rasa, or I'm thinking of the famous poem, the Gita Govinda, which is just an astonishing poem, but with many different interpretations. It would really reinforce the idea that, oh, women should behave like Radha, or women should behave like Parvati, and it would oftentimes be used to reinforce the negative parts of the varnashram system. The varna meaning color, the caste system, and so these were often, unfortunate misinterpretations that are even going on today in India in some political arenas, and that always has to be pointed out is that these, because the word tantra is very easy to say, and the word rasayana is very easy to say, but it can easily slip into causing a lot of suffering for a lot of people.
Yeah, and it can, these things can slip into power dynamics, because, and as we started looking at even like the Navaratri tradition that's done, that has become almost, it's a wonderful tradition because it emphasizes,
It can be fun.
yeah, it emphasizes emotion, and there's fasting, et cetera, but it also is one, when you take any idea like this richness that is rasa itself, that when we go back to Abhinavagupta and realize, and before him, when the idea of rasa was something that was sort of come up with in order to describe the mystical experience or the unspeakable, that without words, that we all experience. When we then take anything like that, but in particular the rasa in this case, we're very prone to sort of to dumb it down, or to make it not as powerful, to take away the powerful roots of it. And it's relevant, very relevant today in this period in history, because that, in a sense, is what is going on in many aspects of the world, in particular in the United States these days, with some of the extreme actions that have happened in the last 6 months, weeks, etc., where it's as if there are all of these, it's like there's this avalanche that's starting to happen, where progress, where insight, where interconnectedness and communication, like the potential for global communication, for global cooperation, is it. If you look at that almost as this emotional state of or a political state of representing something like love, it's terrifying. It's an emotional state for our world and for the cultures that are in power these days, that is a little bit terrifying. And so there are all these sort of sideline efforts to sort of put heat under that top level of this of the culture, and sort of heat it up over here, heat it up over there, heat it up over there, and let the whole thing slide off into oblivion, so that we can get back to having power in the hands of those who are fearful, who are experiencing the rasa of fear, who are needing the control.
Who are demonic.
Who are demonic. And this is how we do it within ourselves as well, where we, sort of dumb things down enough that we get a taste for the juice, for the rasa, but then fear arises, or uncertainty.
And we can't experience that same darkness that we see in the religious fundamentalism gone bad. We can't see our own extreme tendency to do that, because naturally ego does that. Like my mantra is better than your mantra, and so each of us, we're like competing between autocrats. Like, who's going to win? I could mention a few, but there's no, and in mythology, they had, conveniently, and all of this is just, they're using the principle of religion, the principle of mantra, the principle of tantra, yantra, and then of even rasa to, and it becomes perverted at that point where embodiment is not allowed. And so that's the importance of embodying.
And as we look at these things, then and have this theory that we can kind of grok and understand, it's pretty straightforward. But then, we in the body experience resistance to it. And one of the things that we can do as a practice is to start learning to trust and to really experience the prana body, or that kosha of the prana that has woven into it this sort of intelligence that it offers of sort of where emotion, the raw emotion, the rasas, the flavors exist before they have been identified by mind and body.
Built into the body on that level is history. Of course, the word histos meaning flesh in Greek. And so, and notice that the, cultures where, religion has become fundamentalistic and cultish and cruel. They don't want you to study history, forget history. But you've got this fantastic history book called Your Own Histos, Your Own Flesh. And it's really built in there. And it's a deeper history than even, you'll find at the library in some, some very good books, but it goes back not more than generations. It goes back through different species. It goes back all the way.
And into the experiences of
And
your
it's
own
a direct
life.
experience of history.
Yeah.
Oh.
And so all of these experiences of these different emotions, the rasas, live in your body, and they are embedded there both as potential, but also as experiences you've had in the past. And then it goes beyond your own body into the history of your species, etc. But a fascinating thing that happened to me earlier last week, and I was telling Richard about this, is I was having some wonderful myofascial work done on me because of some awareness that I'm, having about weirdness in my psoas muscle and on one side. And as I was having my fascia very tenderly worked with, this memory of something from my childhood when I was maybe 8 or 9, just vivid memory with smells, with, sounds, with, 3D pictures came into my existence. And it, because we are these walking histories where when we soften enough, when we open up this layering of within our own bodies that's stored in our fascia, that's stored within our subconscious mind, there is this great capacity to have, if not insight, at least to have a sense of humor about what we have held onto so tightly, that might have been held onto as a protective measure, might have been held onto just as an instinctual measure, but might be something that is ready for change, which is, again, coming back to our asana practice or our pranayama practice, when we start consciously introducing them into our awareness of our physical experience of the different emotions, the different flavors of emotion as they arise before we have acted on them. So that if we feel a sense of anger, or if we actually have acted on them even in our minds or something, and at the moment we notice them, if we just take the pause long enough to almost like inject some breath into it, and to inject some awareness into where in this corporeal landscape that I seem to be inhabiting, where is this happening? And rather than trying to analyze it or manipulate it or change it or knock it down or fast from it or whatever, but just give it that space that we talk about so often as this space in of upekshanam, where you don't know what it is and you just hold it as if it is sacred.
Yeah, and that considered, that's the important and difficult technique.
Yeah.
So we should see if there are any comments
Yeah.
or questions.
So to wrap it up, we would just really love you to really appreciate it, actually, if you would take the time to trust your breath and to trust the sense of spaciousness that you can feel in your body when you soften into the breath. And that if you soften into the breath and you can soften down into yourself, there's also this capacity that starts waking up where you can soften almost into the space around you as well. So it becomes an aspect of not separating yourself off by just becoming internal and doing your practice, but really this living example that you can feel kind of in every cell of your body, where you are both deeply in your own experience, but deeply and profoundly connected beyond your skin to everything else, which actually is the truth of what is happening. We just, that's a lot to kind of live with and take in all the time if you have fear or disgust or live in a world of doubt and uncertainty. Those flavors make it very difficult to allow that kind of trust, so that liaison of prana and rasa, body and mind, so that can come together and really manifest in a natural way rather than in a contrived manner. So we really encourage you to, when you notice states, emotional states arising, know that that's normal, and know that acting on those emotions or becoming attached to the good ones, the good ones like love, have consequences. And then asking yourself, what is really important to you? Like, what is of meaning and what is of importance to you? And how is your relationship to these emotional states impacting your actions or your lack of ability to see other things, see the context that you find yourself in, and just allow that exploration to be part of the experience of these rasas arising, rather than having them arise and acting on them immediately, which is where the world today is kind of taking us.
Stuck.
Yeah.
Looping. I think
Looping.
looping.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So
Mhm.
anyway, so we thank you so much for joining us. And we'll stick
Yeah.
around for any questions you have.
Yeah.